Good morning, dear friends. Today is October 27th, 2022. We are presently at our weekly Saturday morning Sangha, and we're talking about the concept, the Buddhist concept of home. And as often happens in the Plum Village tradition, we start with a little singing, and I realized both from the standpoint of how things are in the center and on men that we can't sing. So we have Sister Jewel to start us out. We're going to have a little song from Sister Jewel that's related to the Gatha that I did. So. I'm going to start all the way.
At home, arrived, at home, I am at home, dwelling in the here and dwelling in the now, solid as a mountain, free as the white cloud, the door to no birth and no death is open, free and unshakable. Arrived, at home, I am at home, dwelling in the here and dwelling in the now, solid as a mountain, free as the white cloud, the door to no birth and no death is open, free and unshakable.
Thank you, dear friends. I am going to put myself on speaker view here. So people should, let me see here. I do this differently. Somebody asked me earlier for a Zoom tutorial. I need one myself. I need to pin myself. I can't do, there we go. Ah, I am pinned. So anyway, thank you all for coming this morning and to talk about home. As often happens in my life, maybe in your life as well, things come up in Sangha that are like reflective of my ordinary life. And so home has become a very interesting thing for me. This March, I moved and I made a quick calculation and I may have missed one or two, but it's my 24th address in my life. My address meaning where I was living, where I might be getting mail, although I doubt that I was getting mail as an infant in 1952, but nevertheless. And so we often talk about home as being the place where your address is. Well, maybe. I've had a lot of other places to kind of go with that. And it's very interesting because, the idea of a home is so important. It, as you can hear in the Gatha that we learned and Sister Jewel's beautiful song, the idea that arriving at home, the here and the now, that you can be free as a white cloud, and the door of no birth and no death is left open. So wow, that sounds pretty cool. But home got to be confusing, and I realized that Rick Hansen kind of dropped this as a little tidbit And also Thich Nhat Hanh in another talk dropped it as a little tidbit. So I wanted to flesh that out a little bit. So I can't see you if you're on Zoom, but I think I can hear you. I'm wondering if people might just give me an idea when they hear the word home, what do they think of? Just anything, anybody that has anything to say about it. Home.
Love.
Yes, Kate.
Security.
Security. Mm-hmm.
Warm.
Hmm?
Warm.
Warm. Yeah.
Love.
Love. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Family.
I'm sorry.
Family.
Family. Yeah. Uh-huh. Anyone else?
Memories.
Memories. Yeah. Mhm.
Familiar.
Familiar. Yes. So all of those are very wonderful things. And the other part about it is home implies place. It implies an actual location somewhere. For many of us, home has always been considered the place where we grew up, but maybe not, because many people have grown up in really difficult situations. Also, as you get older and transcend, certainly certain things seem to be more home-like than other kinds of things. But I like to think of it as having three characteristics. The first is, and people have already mentioned that, is safety. It's very interesting. So one of the other books that many of our Sanghas is reading is Brother Pha Phai's book about the 8 realizations of the great beings. They're all wonderful. The second realization is really pertinent to what I'm talking about here. The human mind is always searching outside itself and is never satisfied. Say that one again. The human mind is always searching outside itself and is never satisfied. Which is like, oh my gosh, holy buckets, never satisfied? If I really try real hard. And I think maybe it is one of those things that we can learn to sort of accept. But there are two things that people find in our lives that may be related to our very ancient traditions, or it may be related to the way our DNA is, or it may even be more related to the life that we live right now. We have a thirst for two things that people see as somewhat insatiable: security and approval. I'm going to leave approval aside. We can talk about that some other time and talk about security. So when people talk about home, they talk about being safe. They talk about, you have this image, about some child who falls down on the playground. I just want to go home, or, you have that, even if you've had that kind of wonderful vacation, you come home, it feels like you're in a safe place. And again, some things that were traditionally the homes that people lived in before, or even living now, are not necessarily safe places, but that is kind of the goal of that. And so the idea, number one, of home, I think, is safety. We have this really kind of odd declaration. It sounds odd to the Western mind. Maybe I can translate it a little bit and it won't sound so much. So when we take a step towards becoming a practicing Buddhist, even if it's, not necessarily real formal, we take the 5 mindfulness trainings, which we recited here yesterday and we'll recite tomorrow. But we also take what are called the 3 refuges. I take refuge in the Buddha, which is a personhood, but also an ideal personhood. I take refuge in the Dharma, in the teachings, and I take refuge in the Sangha, the community. And refuge always has a funny sound to it, doesn't it? It really doesn't sound that very accessible. We have to think about it. I like to think about, I find safety as being a better way of saying that. I find safety in the Buddha. I find safety in the Dharma. I find safety in the Sangha. And to realize we have this kind of search for safety, to kind of be in a place where things are warm and protected, and we can just be without the worries of things. Those of you who know Jack Kornfield, he has a very wonderful little translation of what is commonly known as the loving kindness phrases. And so where people, so the loving kindness phrases, just to put into short thing, is there's one about having loving kindness, there's one about physical health, there's one about what we would call today mental health, and there's one about safety. And it's interesting that he has, often in the very old traditions is things like, may I be protected, may I be kept from harm. He actually says, may I be peaceful and at ease. So he brings safety right here to home, to where we are, that if we are peaceful and at ease, then we are safe. And that is kind of an interesting way that we kind of look at it, because most of the time, when we feel unsafe or feel unsure, it's not as if there really are tigers at the door, but we imagine that there are, and especially in this environment. Our hunter-gatherer ancestors, and not even that, the people who lived in places and times in, say, earlier times, even a couple of 100 years ago, had much more danger in their lives than we do. But even then, I think that the idea that we could find refuge or find safety in community was possible even then. So I like that kind of idea of finding safety in community, finding safety in our own basic Buddha nature, and finding safety in these teachings. And again, Jack Kornfield kind of says the sort of same thing. So the other part about that is that people didn't mention is we usually think of home as a place. And, we can sometimes think of it as a larger place. For example, people might say, my home is in the universe, or is in planet Earth, or something along those places, but we're still putting it into place. So we have this idea that some places are, for want of a better term, more sacred, but maybe just more safe, or more connected, or more for putting our mind at ease than other places. And I think this is true for me. I have several places that I would call spiritual homes. The first is, one of them is, and certainly not the primary one, would be the Christine Center, where we had our retreat, which I've been traveling more to frequently. And certain places in nature that are really kind of precious to me, that I kind of visit every once in a while. Like, for example, the Rotary Arboretum has now become, since we've been doing walking meditation there for over 2 years, has become more of a sort of place, a home, a spiritual home. And of course, right here in this room, in the mindfulness community, that you would have that kind of thing. So we often do find places where we can find that particular idea of home, of a spiritual home, where we feel safe and connected, that is a physical place that has the people that we need, and perhaps the other kinds of things relating to teachings, et cetera, et cetera. So this is one of those things that we often kind of seek out. Many people who come in through this door, or even maybe some of you, have been looking for spiritual home. You've been looking for a place that traditionally might be called a place of refuge, but I would say a place where you can feel safe and secure, that you can feel that you're all together with that. And a lot of that has to do, of course, with being with like-minded folks, and that gets back to a lot of our hunter-gatherer roots. But a lot of it just is kind of the place and the setting for all of that. So one of the things that we are absolutely delighted is that we can be back at the center after that. And The other things that kind of happen about safety is expanding beyond those particular places. You know, the Buddha, and not just the old Buddha, but presently there are other places around like this. He was homeless. I mean, he was intentionally homeless. His history of his life is very interesting. His first 29 years, he lived as a pampered prince. He had, you know, basically as much as you could for that particular time for wealth. He had a palace for the summer, a palace for the winter, and a palace for the rainy season, which is what people often had. And he never felt at home about that because he felt disconnected, he thought, from the greater questions of life, birth, old age, sickness, and death, which actually are all related to connections with other people. So he left what many would be considered to be a really primo home. This is really terrific. You know, you have these three wonderful places to be. He left his wife and child in the middle of the night to go out and essentially find himself a home, and found a couple of teachers that didn't kind of go with that. And then he basically starved himself. He did aesthetic practice for 5 years and nearly died. The interesting story sometime about how he was saved by a young teenager on the way to her betrothal party. Without that, the Buddha would remain unknown to us forever. Nevertheless, he found that as he got out with his ascetics, and he found that they had been, he sat under the Bodhi tree, he achieved enlightenment, whatever that is. And he decided that he needed to sort of become out there and help other people find their way. And he started with the other 5 mendicants that he was with, that he had that kind of connection with. And he started teaching there and very gradually growing. But his, at least from the standpoint of the framework of what we traditionally called home, they made the official the official idea of being homeless in that sense that you might see homeless people on the street now. There were some very kind people who did little monasteries for him that he would come and visit, but he never plucked himself down there. So, for example, during the rainy season in India, you, especially at that time, could not go anywhere. There was mud everywhere, so you had to hunker down. So he would hunker down for that thing. But most of the time, the people who he was with, including the Buddha himself, were wanderers, getting around and moving around. And it was not a way of being, of practicing asceticism just for the sake of being, you know, kind of difficult to the body. What he was trying to do is to expand the monastic's viewpoint of what home was. That home was wherever you are, and it would be actually the idea at just in the breath you could do that. That in your own, you are home right here, right now, in this precious human birth. That you don't have to go anywhere to find home. That you don't have to be anything to find home. That home is right here. Which is why that particularly lovely song, you know, I have arrived, I am home. So part of our practice is learning to arrive, learning to get from a place where we're feeling lost and homeless to a place where we have arrived. And yes, structures like the one I'm sitting in right now, or the Christine Center, or whatever particular place that you find. And again, I think I find some places in nature to be particularly that way. Whatever that is, you still, in the midst of standing in line at the grocery store or even the DMV, you can be at home. You know, having a difficult conversation with someone, you can be at home. This is the realization that we have, that we need to, that we aspire to, that we can all be connected. Once we all feel connected, then it is true. Wherever we are is at home. Someone talked about family. Absolutely, that's what we need to do. The idea that the Buddha espoused was, once we get into the idea that everybody is family, that everybody is connected, then we'll be home with whoever we're at, or whoever we're with. A daunting task for many of us, especially for some of those difficult people that might be around us. But, we are all in this particular connection. And it's not just the connection of us. I mean, we're human beings. We share 99.5% of our DNA, is the same. But also with nature and those sorts of things. So this is our aspiration, to be with the breath as being arriving and becoming home. This is where we feel safe. This is where we feel secure. This is where we learn not to shoot ourselves with the second arrow, right? People, I'll go through, I know many people know that story that the Buddha talked about, that we have this idea about the second arrow, which means, even if you're home, quote unquote, everywhere else, things happen to you. Somebody dents your car, you get a bad diagnosis. Whatever happens that happens to you that causes you to have distress is these things happen, and that's considered to be a first arrow. And the second arrow is the arrow that comes in after that we put on ourselves. Oh, well, we do a lot of, self-pitying. Oh, woe is me. We do a lot of blaming. Oh, what kind of jerks did this to me, etc. But once we kind of get to that particular thing where we're home, that tends to dissipate. That tends to disappear. And it takes practice. It absolutely takes practice. One of the things that we have just come about in our understanding our mind group that we got to the other day was Ty talking, and I guess I'm not surprised anymore when he says things that I had completely forgotten about. He said, I'm paraphrasing what he said. He didn't use the word home, but I think that's what he was meaning. If we want to arrive home, all we need to do is practice conscious breathing. He doesn't say that we need to practice it for a long time, but we do. And it often kind of goes with that home is something that can happen to us just by doing conscious breathing, just by the practice. So the idea of home is finding yourself a place where you have safety. And again, besides the individual places you may be sitting in your home right now, besides the places where you might go to do that, you can find it if you practice your breathing, if you always come back to the breath and have that realization that you are connected, that you are safe, because you have all these spiritual friends. Even if you're not aware that you have these spiritual friends, you have them. And this is a particular difficult thing for people who have had very difficult homes, people who really are refugees from other countries and that sort of thing, but it's not impossible even for them. Wonderful story that, Ty talks about in transforming people who have always felt kind of out of the loop, out of the society because of things that have happened to them. Vietnam veterans, he held a summer camp for Palestinian and Israeli kids, those sorts of things. We can kind of get to this with the help of a good community. I like to think of the two things that I now kind of, I have evolved, and I hope I've evolved. I've changed as a teacher over the years. I hope I've evolved. Let's just put it that way. That now when I teach meditation instruction, I talk about two things: intention and gratitude. If we intend to be present, we can be present. It's a little harder sometimes, and we still have many things that tug at our minds that move us away, including some biological things. But that intention to be present and gratitude. And if we have gratitude for the way life is, and if we have intention, then yes, we will feel at home from the standpoint of having a place. The place where we are is the perfect place to be, whatever that is. Person, the people that we are with are the perfect people to be with, even if it doesn't feel like that. And that we can feel safe because we can really feel our connection with that. So intention, when you actually decide that you are doing your conscious breathing, which again, Ty says is all you need to get to this thing, he calls it right view. The idea that we are all trying to just be and feeling the wonderful way that this all supports us. I mean, if you think about it, and it doesn't take much thinking about it, it's astonishing we're here at all. I mean, look at the kinds of things that have to come together that I can talk to you about this. And, somebody had to make that little owl and the Zoom and eyeglasses and hearing aids and all this sort of stuff. I mean, it's just amazing that we're here at all. And we can have that gratitude. Coming back to the breath. So if we start to have the intention that breathing in, I have arrived. Breathing out, I know I am at home. Even if that sometimes feels a little forced, and sometimes it does. We will eventually get to a point where every place feels like home. Everything that we do, everywhere we touch, everything that goes on will feel like home. We will have that idea of person, place, and safety. And we will be able to make greater progress in our own lives, but in the lives of everyone else. And another little story about the idea somebody brought, I think home, in addition to our own little thing, has to deal with feeling that they are people. So I'm going to end with probably my favorite story of the Buddha's life. Ananda, who we gave name to our little owl, not this Ananda, the Ananda that lived 2,600 years ago, who was the Buddha's attendant, came up and once said they were having their mid-morning meal. The way that things worked in the Buddha's time is they went out begging and they got a meal. And he said, he's sitting there and just thinking. By the way, in the sutras, the Ananda is often the foil. There must be 100 times I know in sutras where Buddha says, "Do not say that, Ananda. Do not say that." He says, "Lord, I feel that this special friendship that we have, special friendships, are half of the practice." And the Buddha said, "Do not say that, Ananda. Do not say that. Our special friendship is all of the practice." So I always like to throw in that idea, besides the idea of person, besides the idea of places, people. And so even if you are alone in your home and it feels like home and it feels safety, you still know that it's a warm place, that this is your center from where you connect to. Connection of people, place, and safety. And the vehicle that Thich Nhat Hanh talks about using is the breath. And I'm just going to say that I can only talk about my own practice because everybody's practice is different. But if I had to say, the overriding thing that's happened to me in my 30 plus years of practice is every place now feels more like home than ever. And that's really a wonderful feeling. So thank you all for your kind attention today. I'm going to change a couple of things here. I'm going to change us all to get the owl involved, both from the standpoint of say something, someone, so the owl, there we go. you have become the owl's friend. I'm surprised the owl didn't go right to Kay. The owl really loves Kay. So, and we'll have the foot.
And what's Kevin? I know.
So, dear friends, oh my goodness, we have a young bodhisattva here. How about that? So I'm interested if anybody has comments or questions at this point, anything at all. If you do, bring your hands together as a lotus flower and bow in, and we'll go from there. So comments, questions, anything at all? Okay.
Thank you very much, Paul, for your discussion today or your talk. It's great to have everybody here. I just want to say, you talked about how many places you lived at or your address. And when my husband and I first got married, we lived in Missouri, and then we moved to Indiana. And when we first got there, we had to stay at all these places before we could get into an apartment. And, this just went on and on and on. We moved to California, had a couple places there, moved back to Missouri. We were all over the place, and, always had to go to a bank and get a new bank account, all these things, right? You have to get your new driver's license. I mean, it's kind of a pain in the butt. And then it's like you don't know anybody, you feel homeless in that regards. We're trying to find a place to live. And I didn't practice at the time, but something I did know is that was like, it's not just about my things that helped, some of the things I had, but having my husband with me. So I felt like if he was with me, we were at home, wherever that is. And so now we've been in the same house for 30 years, and I've been coming here for a long time. It's a different kind of home because of my practice, but I just wanted to say that. Thank you all. Okay, bowing out.
Anyone else?
I do.
Chris?
Thank you, dear Sangha, for being here with us today. Yeah, and thanks, Paul. That was really great. Like others, I think the older you get, maybe the more places you move. I had homes too. I can actually look, before I moved to Chicago, that was my 7th home, and I was 9 years old. And a lot of it happened because of my dad. He traveled and was in sales, and then I've mentioned before, he passed away in 1955, polio epidemic when I was 6. But everybody who gave us a home, and every place that I resided in home, I really felt safe and loved, and all the things you pray that you look back on your life with an enormous amount of gratitude. Probably the only place, and it was okay, was when I lived in Muncie, Indiana, Falls State. It was fine for a couple of years. I went back and forth every other weekend to Janesville, but it really wasn't home. It was a place where I worked, and that was about it. But every other place has been home. And Paul, before you said Rotary Arboretum, my mind was there. And before you said the Christine Center, I so understand those places, because the first place where I really felt that I left my soul was when I was in Assisi in Italy. And I'm in a bus heading to Rome. I just turn around, and I just spent 6 days at Casa Papa Giovanni's with 29 people. And the most holy man I've ever met in my life, Donaldo Brunacci, who saved 200 Jews during the war. I mean, to be blessed with such memory. And so the tears were there in my eyes, and I thought, I'm coming back here. So that's why I have been back at a place for 21 times now, and that's the okay day. And they are, there's tough times in Italy. People are losing businesses, and they might very well lose their entire villa, which is on 8 acres of land and just outside of Perugia. It's just beautiful there, beautiful. But it's my family has always been my home, but they took me on in a way of being family that is just, I don't know, I guess it's Italian. And so I've been on the phone and trying to keep that home and being as creative and innovative and crazy with coming up with ideas as we can to keep that home. And when you have a home like that one, and you lose it and you think you're going to lose it, it's really pretty devastating for me because I can really look back on other homes and I've never really lost the concept of home before. And I know I won't lose home, but being that far away, it will affect things. And I'm just hoping that we come up with a way that I'll know that regardless of if they don't live there anymore, it'll always be home to me, that area. And because I think you do leave your soul at a place. I leave my soul at the Christine Center. I wish I lived closer. I'd be there all the time. I would love it. But you do. I think I leave my soul in home. So thank you. Chris going home.
Thanks, Chris.
Well,
Colleen?
yeah, Colleen bowing in. I really loved listening and taking in your words and this idea of I do think maybe I hadn't been that conscious about it, but I think one of the reasons why I practice is to really nurture that sense of internal home, regardless of where I happen to physically be. And I do feel more a sense of safety and a belonging in more places. And I think my practice is a direct reason for that. I also just want to share, one of the things I was thinking about, Paul, as you were speaking, was a moment with my mother about 6.5 or 7 years ago that really illustrated a lot of the essence of what I was hearing you speak to this morning. And that was, she had taken a fall at home. She was in the hospital. She was recovering. And I happened to be there the morning that she had gotten the word from her doctor that he was going to be releasing her, but she couldn't go home. That was, you know, as I get older, it's like that's, I know someday it's gonna occur, and what a big tumultuous arrow that could be, to basically not have a choice, but to know that you can't go back. And so I was there, and she was on the phone with her lifelong best friend. And I heard her say, "Joyce, the doctor told me that he's going to release me, but I can't go home." And then she said, "So, you know, when you get to be our age," she said, I'm just going to go with the flow." And so here was this arrow, but I had the privilege of hearing my mother not bring the second arrow in and decide that going forward, knowing how much instantly she would be turning her back on and leaving behind, she was choosing to go with the flow. And so I never really thought of it this way until this morning, and that she had in that moment been able to expand her experience of home and be receptive to whatever was coming next. So that was a great gift from my mom. Colleen bowing out.
Thanks, Colleen. I just wanted to say, and I wish I could remember the exact person who said it, but an elderly person in a similar situation in the hospital had to go to some care. Remember her saying, well, I'm going to a different home now.
Oh,
As
yeah.
opposed to saying, I can't go home.
Yeah,
But to say I'm going to a different home
yeah.
and see how that is.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
Go ahead, I was gonna say, for
Yeah.
you, I was doing it for you.
oh, thank you. Yes, this is Kevin calling in. I have a question. Thank you for your talk. And when there's a story, and I've heard it several times, like we have here, about the Ananda asked the Buddha about the question, about home or the Sangha, and the Buddha said, the Sangha is not part of the practice, it's the whole practice. And then there's it's, which is somewhat a little contradictory to, and this is like, maybe I just get a little too intellectual about it sometimes. It's just somewhat contradictory of when you're breathing and when you're back to your breath, that's your home. Can you talk about that a little bit further?
for sure. Thank you, Kevin, because that can be confusing. What is the difference between I'm coming back to my breath and I'm connecting with everybody? They're not separate things. I mean, that's the illusion that we get when we put things into self and other. I'm connecting to my breath. As I'm sitting here this morning, breathing in the molecules. You guys have your respiratory trees all over the molecules I'm breathing. I'm breathing in Kevin's molecules. I'm breathing in, Colleen. Maybe not so much with Crystal. And when we really kind of get there to the idea that we are not this isolated thing that needs to be liberated, we are part of an overall process of liberation. And actually, that's another thing I was going to mention. I didn't mention it in the talk so much. The concept, one of the things that people use for enlightenment is liberation. And liberation has many connotations, but one of the connotations is taking you away from danger, getting you safe. So liberation. So when you are on your breath and following your breath, you're connected to the atmosphere and to nature and really to all the people anyway. So it's an illusion that they're two different things. That's how you kind of go with that. It's an illusion that you're two different things. The Buddha actually did say at the end of his life, when he often said to be his last words, diligently seek your own liberation. But he wasn't doing that because he thought every individual person was going to be their own little Sangha and everything else. He realized that we're all kind of rowing this boat together and how that kind of goes. So you're paying attention to your breath by yourself, and you don't have a single thought in your head about me helps liberate me, even if it doesn't seem like that's the case. So, the separation, the illusion that following our breath and doing self-care has nothing to do with other people is an illusion. Having self-care has everything to do with everyone else. It's the way that we live, and we have to. You certainly cannot live by yourself. Everything else have to be connected with you. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Let's see if there's anyone in the Zoom space. I'm going back to the Zoom space. Michelle.
Thank you. This was really I think maybe be a really big change for me, having heard you talk. Or let's say maybe a development, a good development. When I started, I think many of you have heard, that I'm a Christian minister, and so, but doing a lot of questioning in my life. I spent a lot of time thinking that it was important to try to mesh my theology with mindfulness, and realized that really wasn't necessary because there's such order within them. But what I did realize when you were talking about home is that I've been trying to feel I had to mesh what I would have called my home, because like many of you, I lived in a million different countries and places growing up, and I didn't have one until I came to Milwaukee and developed one, at least a home of place. But I had a home with my husband that was in a condo right across from the church I served in. I had a community which had sort of adopted me when I suddenly had 3 children to raise by myself, which was St. Mark's. And still today, in 2022, that community is huge for me. I don't know how I'd walk away from it. That was home. But then I've realized that I've come more and more to think of many of you, again, not as a place, but as people that I felt at home with, listened to, thought gave me wise direction, supported me. So now I'm not sure what I have to do. Do I have to see how to do a better job of kind of integrating these communities and not thinking that I have to like go to one or go to the other? So that's my observation. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. I'd like to say that basically basically what I would say about that is you can have different homes. You can have different sort of spiritual homes, or they can mean something different to you. I mean, again, in Thai's tradition, we're talking about the home being everywhere. But just like in your own physical home, you know, your sewing room is not the same as your garage, not the same as your basement, not the same as your kitchen. They're all different places. They're all part of your home, and they all reflect various parts of your existence, but they're not the same thing. And so your quote unquote spiritual home here and your spiritual home at St. John's are basically, you know, the same thing. I mean, they're manifestations of the same kind of humanity in my mind. Just as, you know, the air and the address of your kitchen is the same as the air and the address of your sewing room. I mean, they really are. And so that's the kind of way I look at this, is that it's not as if you need to make a melding or a choice. They can be different, and they can be all, and they still can be home. That makes sense to you?
When you say it, it does. I'm not sure. When I try to figure it out, you know, the other part, we're talking about St. John's, that's a whole new issue of where I live and all. But when I lived right off of Downer in what I call the little village, with all of those things where you go to the grocery store every day and say hi, and you go down to the bookstore, you go down everything, the hardware store. To me, that was just the apex of living, in the sense of feeling a place and a security and a peace in a little place like that. As if, because I've never lived in a little town or a village. And even now at St. John's, where certainly there's security, there's some nice people. I don't know if I'll ever, you know, be able to lose, because when I talk about the church and that community, that living there is all together with that. And I feel like I need to have an integration to continue to live without living in the past, without being so nostalgic about it that you forget what was hard or what wasn't so good about it. And that's the transition I'm trying to make now. As I said, not with because I get different ways of living from our Sangha and church, but it's really a difference in place, I guess. And I'm not sure physical place should have such a big part in it. But it has been for me. And so all I can say is what you were saying, I thought was very good, but I'm not sure how I do it.
Mhm.
Okay.
Thank you, Michelle. Sure, you know what to do. You do know what to do. It's mindful awareness, and that's basically how this kind of goes with that. The one thing I would like to sort of impinge on your consciousness is that many of us are nostalgic for places and times, but those places and times are gone. They're different. If you're on Downer Avenue right now, they're going to build a big apartment building right in your yard there. And so
Beaten up more times.
yeah, everything changes anyway. So a lot of times we hold on to trying to have the permanence of a wonderful place. But even if you were there, it would change. Everything changes. Everything changes. I think it was Suzuki was asked once that tell me Buddhism in 2 words, and he says everything changes. So kind of keeping that in mind. But it's as much your spiritual home now as it ever was, and even if it changes. So yeah, even if you're there or not there, it still has a special place in your heart. So
That makes sense.
yeah. Anyone else have a comment today? Paul DuPont.
Thanks, Paul. Paul bowing in. I think what I resonated most in your talk, Paul, is what Colleen was also referring to and talking to, was about the sense of home no matter where we go, and developing that sense of home within ourselves and leading us to feel more at home in more different places. In my relatively short journey on this path, I think I've really felt a greater sense of that within myself, that I because of the changes within myself, I can be different places with different people, different sorts of contexts, and feel much more comfortable, and even a greater degree of feeling at home in those different places. And I thought it was all this, the self-development through the practices, but I think it's more than that. I think it's another part of this tradition of inner being. If I think of just home as sort of like a physical place, then outside of that home is somewhere else that is not the home. It's different, and it's 2 separate things. But I think within this tradition of interbeing and everything connected, and we connected with everyone in every place, I think that's another part of this tradition that really makes us feel more at home. There's less boundary within ourselves and within our physical structures, and a greater sense of being a part of so much more everywhere with everyone. That's also contributing to this greater sense of being at home, different places, at least for me. Paul bowing out.
Thank you, Paul, for those wonderful comments. Yes. The idea, of course, is that making dichotomies of any sort is bound to cause suffering and difficulties. So if we tend to divide our lives into this is home and this is not home, and do that a lot, then we end up with a situation where we suffer. So it is true that sitting in the mindfulness center, I'm thinking of this as home. But if I walk out on the street here on Park Place, does that feel like home? I'm trying to work on that so that there isn't much of a difference. And I think I'm getting more successful at it, but still kind of an uphill thing. So sometimes home versus having the idea of not home is a source of suffering. So yeah. Any other comments today from anyone? Yeah, Stuart.
Stuart bowing in. About 3 weeks ago, I sold my home. And so I'm, although I have a place to stay right now, I am kind of literally homeless. And that's been very challenging, but something I thought about a lot recently, and I was reminded of, Paul, by your words about home and also about breathing, is a passage from Breathe, You Are Alive, Tay's commentary on the Anapanasati Sutra. He says, we only have to be aware of the existence of happiness, and we have it right away. This idea that the kind of recollection of happiness is happiness itself. And I think that's true about home too, that our recollection and our kind of evocation of home is home. And so even when we don't literally have a home, we can kind of find one in that island of ourselves. Stuart Bannon.
Thank you, Stuart. Thanks everyone for this observation. There is absolutely no requirement for anybody to talk, but Laura, David, and Gary have not, and I'm just giving you the opportunity if you have something that you would like to say or add to the conversation. Yes, Laura.
Well, yeah, it's a great topic. And I get the distinction between the physical and the spiritual homes. And to me, the spiritual one is like, if I can get to feeling comfortable in my own skin, like that is where I want to get to, so that I feel at home anywhere. And then I really do have a internal debate about where to live because I own this 3-unit rental property. I've owned it since 2015 and I live in it and I don't want to live in it anymore. I want to either get a condo or I really want one of those old character homes. I think they're so beautiful, but they also tend to have a lot of issues. And then the pros of living in a condo, I think I wouldn't feel so alienated and isolated. And then I can't decide whether I should move to the Milwaukee area or the Fox River Valley area because my parents are up there. However, it's just a really, really hard decision for me. They're so old. And I live in the Madison area. And this debate has been going on forever. So, but to me, I just want to get to the point where I feel comfortable in my own skin wherever I am. And to me, I think that means having self-confidence, in myself. And that's something that I've really battled with. That's it.
Thank you, Laura. Gary?
I would just like to thank you for the talk this morning, Paul. It's very, it was very well received by me. There's little else for me to say. I think it was a wonderful talk.
Thanks, Gary. David, remarkably silent today, David. And again, there's no requirement to say anything. You can let it pass. So,
well, given all of the fascinating things people said, it pretty well covers things. One small comment: when Colleen talked about safety and then belonging, the word belonging really resonated with me. If I feel that I belong somewhere, then it's home. And if I feel I belong somewhere, then I feel safe. And it may even be in a very unsafe situation, as long as I belong and there's other people that I'm part of. That's it. Dave bowing out.
thank you, David. Anyone else with a comment today? Yes, Chris.
Paul, I'm glad you came here about 30 years ago and started this place. And I just want to show my appreciation for that and for everybody that I met through here. I was telling Stuart that when I retired, which I never really did, I just refocused. I said, I want to find a Buddhist center and, you know, and I checked out the place down the street, the Shambhala Center and all that. But I came to the door here in the afternoon, I saw 4 people in here. And I closed the door because they were doing something. Come in, come in. They said, we're doing a book study. And they said, sit down and join us. And I said, I haven't read the book. It doesn't make any difference. Just have a seat. I knew at that moment that I was in one of those places that we're talking about where you belong and you feel safe. And it is a place that you're going to come back to. And there's no doubt about it. I found my place. And like you said, to Michelle, you know, I have found that Franciscan and Buddhism is just the same. And I think it's because of everything you're talking about. I mean, not that it's identical, but there's so much the same, the values, the everything. But this place is wonderful. And thank you for all your efforts and everything you do 7 days a week to keep this alive. You've given your heart and soul to it, everything. Chris Bowman.
Thank you, Chris. I accept your thanks with a great deal of gratitude. But in the idea of interbeing, it was clearly not, it wasn't me. It was a lot of different people, some who are no longer around, but many people in this room and on this screen. So it wasn't just me, but I'm very happy that I'm happy that you're here. I'm happy that this kind of worked out. So. Michelle. You're muted, Michelle.
Oh, I think it's interesting with the compliment. That's a learning thing too, because the way you reacted was not, I didn't get a sense that that's, oh, I'm just going to be humble. But I really liked what you said, where I think what you pointed out is something that's important. And it has, you know, it's obvious that that's important to you. Yeah. If I may just say one thing that's helped me recently is a book called The Daily Stoic, which again, like other things, I found has some things that I don't hit the middle of my soul. But this is kind of like one of those church things that are so sweet and awful that you can't do it for more than 5 days. But this has 366 short meditations going with various Stoic philosophers from the time of the Greeks. And I'm amazed at how much they mesh with all of this. And they're very practical. And they really helped me get started in the morning to begin to meditate on that and then leave it and just breathe. So anyway, I don't know if anybody's curious. Hopefully I'll be getting over to the center in person soon. And I'd be glad to let people look at it. I have found it really helpful to giving me some kind of a peaceful start on the day. Okay, bowing out.
Thank you, Michelle.
Paul,
Ken?
I have one thing to add about the arrows that strike us after something happens. And this week a few things happened, and I think I discovered something. No, something happened. I almost spilled this quart of paint. I only spilled a little bit of it, and so it took me like 10 minutes to clean up, and I was firing arrows at myself all the time. And so I started I started giving the arrows a sound. I went, pew, pew. And I found it to be kind of humorous. And then so just by doing that, it was helpful, just by giving it a sound. And I was able to change it over to gratitude, that it didn't go worse. And it was helpful. So following up.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you.
Kay bowing in. Yeah, I know somebody that, they had a rubber band, and every time they had negative thoughts, they'd flick it so they would give themselves pain. So to realize what they were doing. Yes. Laura, I want to just say that about this sense of, I think this confidence thing, and I think that is really big. The breathing, confidence of knowing you could be safe, that you're all right. You have a right to be wherever you are. And I, because I've known in my practice has really helped me sort of, I think there's an acceptance, and sort of like the arrow thing, you just accept it. And we talked a little bit last week about this, and something I'd like to talk to Paul about sometimes, but the difference between what we talked about with the emptiness thing, empty, and all that. So, but the idea of when you come to this point of knowing, you're standing there talking to somebody, you're engaged, you're okay, you're breathing, and it's okay. It's an okay thing. It's not a bad thing. I don't know how. The only thing that came to mind just now to explain this is I remember when I first learned how to water ski. Of course, I couldn't do it now, but they say they were yelling at me, switch your legs, do this, do that. They were yelling at me from the back of the boat, and I was trying to do all these things they were telling me. And I was able to do it, but it was interesting because I had to do all these little lined up things. And it was like, oh, here I am. Okay. So I think that's the breathing and being home. I mean, it's sort of like that, maybe the practice, you kind of build it up. I don't think it stays that way. You have to keep building it up. But I really appreciate that comment about confidence and acceptance. Okay, bowing up.
Yes, Kay. Anyone else? So thank you, dear friends. I'm going to be stopping the recording now, and just realize that when the Klingons take over the planet, sometimes they're going to see this. And I hope that your ancestors are okay. I mean, your descendants are okay because of that.